The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the weathered chapel of Cedar Ridge, its rays cutting through the dusty air like knife blades. The small wooden structure stood defiant against the harsh Wyoming landscape, its whitewash long since surrendered to the elements. Inside, the air hung thick with the scent of sweat, leather, and dying wildflowers that someone had half-heartedly arranged near the altar. Sarah McAllister stood before the makeshift pulpit, her hands trembling as they clutched a worn piece of paper. The wedding dress she wore had belonged to her mother, a simple cotton affair yellowed with age and mended in places where time had worn it thin. It hung loose on her frame, as if even the dress knew this union wasn't meant to be. The congregation shifted restlessly on the rough wooden pews, ranchers in their Sunday best, which meant their cleanest work clothes, fanned themselves with their hats. Their wives whispered behind gloved hands, eyes darting between Sarah and the man standing beside her. Elliot Harper cut an imposing figure in his imported suit, the fabric too fine for this frontier town. His clean-shaven face bore the satisfied expression of a man who just closed a profitable business deal, which, Sarah supposed bitterly, was exactly what this was to him. "Go on, girl," Reverend Morrison prompted gently, his weathered face creased with concern. He'd baptized Sarah when she was barely a week old, had presided over her mother's funeral just 2 winters past. The old man knew this wasn't right, but what could he do? The law was the law, and debts had to be paid. Sarah tried to speak. Her lips moved, but no sound emerged. She glanced at the paper again, wedding vows her father had written out for her, afraid she might say the wrong thing and ruin the arrangement. The words blurred before her eyes. "Sarah Elizabeth McAllister," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do hereby take—" The words caught in her throat like barbed wire. A single tear escaped, tracing a path down her dust-covered cheek. Then another, and another. I can't—" The paper fluttered from her nerveless fingers. A sob tore from her chest, raw and wounded. 20 years of trying to be the dutiful daughter, of carrying the weight of her family's survival on her shoulders. All came crashing down in that moment. She pressed her hands to her face, shoulders shaking with the force of her grief. The chapel erupted in scandalized murmurs. "Knew she'd break," came the harsh whisper of Mrs. Donnelly. "Marrying for money always shows in the end." "Poor thing," countered Mary Sullivan. "Lost her James not 6 months ago. And now this—" "Silence!" Elliot's voice cracked like a whip. He grabbed Sarah's wrist, his grip tight enough to bruise. "You're making a spectacle of yourself. Remember what's at stake here." Sarah flinched, but couldn't stop the tears. She thought of James Walker, her James, who'd kissed her goodbye beneath the cottonwood tree and promised to return after the cavalry patrol. They'd found his body 3 days later, Apache arrows still protruding from his back. He'd been 22 years old, with calloused hands and a gentle smile that could make her forget all the hardships of frontier life. "Sarah, please!" Her father's voice came from the front pew, thin and desperate. Thomas McAllister had aged a decade in the past year. The drought had killed their crops, disease had taken half their cattle, and the banknote on their land was due. Without this marriage, they'd lose everything. The homestead his father had died defending, the only life Sarah had ever known. She met his eyes, seeing her own anguish reflected there. He was a good man. Her father, he'd never remarried after losing her mother, had raised her as best he could. This arrangement with Elliot was killing him inside. But what choice did they have? "That's enough theatrics," Elliot hissed. He yanked her around to face him, his gray eyes cold as winter steel. "You knew what this was when you agreed. Your family's land for my protection and status. Simple business." "I know," Sarah whispered, hating herself for the words. "I know, but—" "But nothing. Would you rather see your father in debtor's prison, your young brother working the mines, because that's what awaits if you don't compose yourself and finish these vows? Tommy," Sarah's heart clenched at the thought of her 12-year-old brother. He still had their mother's sweet disposition, still believed the world held wonders beyond their struggling ranch. She couldn't condemn him to a life underground, couldn't watch the light die in his eyes the way it had died in hers. Reverend Morrison cleared his throat uncomfortably. Perhaps we should take a moment. We'll take nothing, Elliot snapped. The girl will say her vows, or her family will face the consequences. I've been more than patient. Patient. Sarah almost laughed at the word. Elliot had swooped in like a vulture the moment word spread of their debts. He owned the largest ranch in 3 counties, had interests in the railroad coming through. He needed a wife to cement his position in society, and she needed his money to save her family. Patient wasn't the word she'd use for a man who'd cornered desperate prey. She wiped her eyes with shaking hands, trying to gather the shattered pieces of her composure. The chapel had grown quiet again, the weight of 60 pairs of eyes pressing down on her, some pitying, some curious, some simply eager for the drama to unfold. This was her life now, this moment, standing in her dead mother's dress beside a man who saw her as nothing more than a business acquisition. This was her future stretching out endlessly before her. Sarah bent to retrieve the fallen paper, her movements mechanical. She smoothed it against her skirts, the words swimming before her tear-blurred vision. She could do this. For Papa. For Tommy. She could speak these words and die a little more inside with each one. I, Sarah Elizabeth McAllister, she began again, her voice hollow and broken, do hereby take Elliot James Harper. The words felt like ashes in her mouth, each one a nail in the coffin of the life she'd once dreamed of. She thought of the letters James had written her from the frontier, full of plans for their future. A little house by the creek, children playing in the yard, growing old together on land they'd worked with their own hands. To be my lawfully wedded husband? More tears came, silent now, a steady stream that dripped onto the yellowed paper. The ink began to run, blurring the carefully scripted words. How fitting, she thought distantly. Even the vows were dissolving under the weight of her grief. Look at me, Elliot commanded. Sarah raised her eyes to his, seeing no warmth there, no compassion, just cold satisfaction and perhaps a hint of irritation at the delay. This was the face she'd wake up to for the rest of her life. This was the man who'd own her as surely as he owned his cattle and horses. To have and to hold. The chapel door groaned on its hinges, a sound like the earth itself protesting this union. But no one entered. Just the wind, Sarah thought dully. Just the endless Wyoming wind that scoured the land and the souls of those who tried to tame it. Ay, from this day forward. Forever, the word echoed in her mind like a death knell. Forever bound to a man who didn't love her, who didn't even see her as fully human. Forever grateful for his money while hating herself for needing it. Forever mourning the love she'd lost and the life she'd never have. Continue, Elliot said when she paused again. Sarah opened her mouth, but all that emerged was a broken sob. She couldn't do it. She couldn't speak these final words that would seal her fate, not with James's memory still so fresh, his ghost standing witness to her betrayal. I'm sorry, she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was apologizing to. Elliot, her father, James, or herself. I'm so sorry. The chapel held its breath, waiting. Sarah stood frozen, tears streaming down her face, the very picture of a woman caught between duty and despair. The morning that had started with such grim determination had crumbled into this moment of raw, public anguish. And still, the vows remained unfinished, hanging in the air like a question that demanded an answer she couldn't give. The chapel doors burst open with such force they slammed against the walls, sending a thunderous echo through the small space. Every head turned as one, and Sarah's tears momentarily ceased in shock. A man stood silhouetted in the doorway, the harsh morning light blazing around him like hellfire. Dust motes danced in the disturbed air as he stepped forward, his spurs ringing against the wooden floor with each deliberate stride. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a long leather duster coat that had seen better days. A week's worth of stubble darkened his jaw, and his wide-brimmed hat cast shadows across his face. But it was his eyes that caught Sarah's attention. Deep brown, like good whiskey, with lines at the corners that spoke of long days squinting into the sun. Those eyes swept the congregation before settling on her tear-stained face, and something shifted in their depths. Recognition. Pity she couldn't tell. "Well now," the stranger drawled, his voice carrying the lazy authority of a man who'd faced down worse than a chapel full of shocked townsfolk. "Seems I'm interrupting something." Elliot Harper's face flushed purple. "You're damn right you're interrupting. This is a private ceremony. Remove yourself immediately." The cowboy, for that's what he clearly was, from his worn chaps to the Colt .45 visible at his hip, merely tilted his head. A slight smile played at the corner of his mouth, though it held no warmth. "Private ceremony." He took another step forward, and several men in the congregation shifted nervously. There was something dangerous about him, something that suggested violence held carefully in check. Funny thing about ceremonies, they're supposed to be joyful occasions. His gaze returned to Sarah, taking in her trembling form, her reddened eyes, the way she seemed to shrink into herself. "Don't see much joy here. What I see is a woman crying her eyes out while folks sit and watch like it's a hanging." "How dare you?" Elliot snarled. He released Sarah's wrist to face the intruder fully. "Do you have any idea who I am?" "Elliot Harper," the cowboy said easily. "Own the Double H Ranch. Got your fingers in the railroad deals. Made your fortune buying up foreclosed properties from desperate families." His smile grew sharper. "Yeah, I know exactly who you are." The congregation gasped. Nobody spoke to Elliot Harper that way, not if they valued their life in Cedar Ridge. "And you are," Reverend Morrison interjected, trying to restore some semblance of order. The stranger touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that might have been respectful if not for the mockery in his eyes. "Luke Callahan, Reverend, just passing through, or so I thought." His attention returned to Sarah. "But I can't ride on when I see something that sits so wrong with my conscience." "Your conscience," Elliot laughed, though the sound held no humor. "A drifter's conscience, that's rich." Luke's hand didn't move toward his gun, but somehow the threat was there all the same. "A man's worth ain't measured by the land he owns. Harper, sometimes it's measured by what he's willing to stand up against." He walked down the center aisle, his boots echoing in the tense silence. People pulled back as he passed, as if he carried danger like a contagion. He stopped just short of the altar, close enough that Sarah could smell the trail on him, leather and horse and sage. "Ma'am," he said, his voice gentling considerably. "Don't believe we've been properly introduced." "Sarah," she managed, bewildered by this turn of events. "Sarah McAllister. Miss McAllister." He studied her face with those whiskey eyes. "That's a powerful lot of tears for what's supposed to be the happiest day of your life. Makes a man wonder if you're standing here by choice." "Of course she's here by choice," Elliot snapped. "We have an arrangement." "I wasn't talking to you." Luke's voice carried enough steel to cut. He kept his eyes on Sarah. "I'm asking the lady, because from where I'm standing, this don't look like any wedding I've ever seen. Looks more like a sacrifice." Sarah's breath caught. How could this stranger see so clearly what everyone else was determined to ignore? "You don't understand," she whispered. "My family. I understand plenty." Luke's expression softened further. "I understand desperation. I understand doing things that tear you apart inside because you think you don't have another choice. But I also understand something else." He turned to address the congregation, his voice carrying to every corner of the chapel. "I understand that watching a woman weep through her wedding vows while folks sit silent makes every person here complicit in something shameful. Where I come from, we got a word for taking something from someone who don't want to give it, whether that's their land, their freedom, or their future." "You're speaking out of turn, stranger." Thomas McAllister spoke up, though his voice shook. "You don't know our circumstances." I know enough, Luke interrupted. I know James Walker. The name hit the chapel like a thunderbolt. Sarah swayed on her feet, and only Elliot's quick grab kept her from falling. You knew James, she breathed. Luke nodded slowly. Rode with him on 3 cavalry patrols. Good man, brave man, talked about you constantly. Sarah this, Sarah that. Man was plumb crazy about you. Fresh tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks. But these were different. These carried the ache of memory rather than despair. James is dead, Elliot said flatly. Ancient history, irrelevant to today's proceedings. The temperature in the chapel seemed to drop 10 degrees. Luke's hand did drift toward his gun this time, just a casual adjustment of his gun belt that fooled no one. A man's love don't become irrelevant just because he stops breathing, Luke said, his voice deadly quiet. And promises made to dying men sure as hell don't expire. What promises? Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she could bear the answer. Luke reached inside his duster and withdrew an oilcloth packet. His movements were careful, reverent, as he unfolded it to reveal a letter water-stained, blood-stained, but still readable. James lived for about an hour after the Apache found us, he said, his voice carrying the weight of that memory. Long enough to make me promise I'd find you, long enough to write this. He held out the letter. Sarah reached for it with trembling hands, but Elliot snatched it away. This is ridiculous, Harper declared. Whatever theatrical performance you're attempting. Luke moved faster than anyone expected. One moment, Elliot held the letter. The next. Luke had twisted his wrist just enough to make him release it, all while maintaining an expression of perfect calm. That letter's for Miss McAllister, he said mildly, though his grip on Elliot's wrist suggested anything but mildness. I'd thank you not to interfere with a dead man's last wishes. He released Elliot and handed the letter to Sarah with surprising gentleness. I'm sorry I couldn't bring it sooner. Took me a while to heal up from that fight, and then longer still to find you. Sarah's hands shook as she unfolded the familiar handwriting. The chapel held its breath as she read, her lips moving soundlessly. Whatever James had written, it hit her like a physical blow. She pressed the letter to her chest, a sob escaping her throat. What does it say? Her father asked desperately. Sarah looked up, her eyes blazing through her tears with something that hadn't been there before. Hope. Maybe, or courage. He says, her voice cracked. She tried again. He says he knows I'll grieve. He says he knows I'll hurt, but he says, she looked directly at Elliot. He says not to let anyone use his death to chain me. He says to find someone who makes me smile again. Really smile, not just pretend. He says, Enough, Elliot's composure finally shattered. This changes nothing. You have debts. Your family has obligations. One dead soldier's romantic notions don't erase reality. Maybe not, Luke agreed. But they sure as hell illuminate it. He addressed the congregation again. Every person here knows this ain't right. You're watching a good woman get sold to pay debts that ain't even hers. You're letting grief and poverty force her into a marriage bed she don't want. It's not that simple, someone called out. Ain't it? Luke challenged. Seems pretty simple to me. Man wants something. Woman don't want to give it. Man uses money and power to take it anyway. Where I come from, we got laws against that. This is legal, Elliot insisted. Completely legal. Legal don't make it right. Luke's voice carried the weight of judgment. And every person sitting in these pews knows it. You're just too scared of Harper's money to say so. A murmur ran through the congregation, denial from some. But Sarah saw guilty recognition in other faces. Mrs. Sullivan dropped her eyes. Old Pete Morrison shifted uncomfortably. Even Reverend Morrison looked troubled. You think you're some kind of hero? Elliot sneered. Riding in here like something out of a dime novel, this is real life. Cowboy, money matters, power matters. Your noble sentiments won't pay the McAllister debts. No, Luke agreed. They won't. He looked at Sarah again, and something passed between them, understanding. perhaps recognition of kindred spirits who'd both lost too much. But there's always another choice, always another way, if folks are brave enough to take it. "What way?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. Luke smiled then, and it transformed his weather-beaten face. "The way where you walk out of here with your head high and your soul intact. The way where you choose your own path, no matter how hard it might be. The way where you don't let fear make you betray everything your James died believing in." The letter in Sarah's hands seemed to pulse with warmth. She read it again, drawing strength from those precious words. When she looked up, her eyes were still wet, but the despair had been replaced by something else. "I can't," she whispered. Then, stronger, "I can't do this." The chapel erupted. Elliot reached for her, but Luke stepped smoothly between them. Thomas McAllister rose from his pew, face ashen. The congregation burst into shocked conversation, but Sarah heard none of it. She stood there in her mother's yellowed dress, holding her dead lover's last letter, and felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. It was fragile, uncertain, potentially foolish, but it was there, kindled by a stranger's intervention and a dead man's words. The question now was whether she'd have the courage to fan that spark into flame. The chaos in the chapel gradually subsided as Sarah clutched James's letter to her chest, her breathing shallow but determined. Luke Callahan stood like a wall between her and Elliot, his presence somehow both calming and dangerous. "Read it aloud," someone called from the back. "We got a right to know what's causing all this fuss." Sarah's hands trembled as she smoothed the blood-stained paper. The congregation leaned forward, hungry for drama or perhaps for truth. She couldn't tell which. "My dearest Sarah," she began, her voice catching on the first words. She cleared her throat and tried again. Stronger now. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then Luke kept his promise, and I've kept mine, to tell you the truth even in death." The chapel fell silent, even Elliot ceasing his protests. There was something sacred about a dead man's words, something that demanded respect even from the hardest hearts. "I'm dying, my love, and there's no prettying that up. But I need you to know that my last thoughts are of you, of your laugh when you beat me at horseshoes, of the way you bite your lip when you're thinking hard, of that dream we shared about the little house by Willow Creek." Sarah's voice broke. Luke shifted slightly, offering silent support without crowding her. She drew a shaky breath and continued. "But here's what I need you to understand. Sarah Elizabeth McAllister, my death don't mean the death of your dreams. I know your pa's in trouble. I know the vultures will circle. I know you'll feel like you got no choice but to sacrifice yourself for your family." Several people in the congregation shifted uncomfortably. Thomas McAllister's face had gone gray as ash. "Don't do it, Sarah, please. For the love of all that's holy, don't let them sell you like cattle to save a piece of land. The land ain't worth your soul. Your family ain't worth your happiness. And I sure as hell ain't worth you dying inside while your body goes on living." "This is manipulation," Elliot burst out. "A dead man's attempt to control." "Shut your mouth, Harper." Old Pete Morrison growled from the third pew. "Let the girl finish." Sarah shot the old rancher a grateful look before continuing. "I asked Luke to find you because he's the best man I know. He'll help if you let him. He knows people, knows ways to make money that don't involve selling yourself. Trust him like you'd trust me." She paused, wiping away fresh tears. "But most important, promise me this. Don't marry without love. Don't share a bed without desire. Don't speak vows without meaning them. I'd rather know you're struggling but free than comfortable but chained." The letter trembled in her hands as she read the final lines. "Find someone who makes you smile again. Sarah, really smile, like you used to smile at me. Find someone who sees you as a partner, not property. Find someone who'd rather face poverty with you than prosperity without you. And when you find that person, love them with all the fire I know burns in your heart." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "All my love, forever and always, James." She folded the letter carefully, pressing it once more to her heart. The chapel remained silent, processing the weight of those words. "Pretty words," Elliot finally said, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "But words don't pay debts. Words don't save farms. Words reveal truth," Reverend Morrison interrupted, stepping forward. He'd been silent throughout the confrontation, but now his weathered face showed firm resolve. "And the truth I'm hearing is that this marriage is built on coercion, not consent." "Reverend," Thomas McAllister pleaded, "you don't understand. Without this marriage, we lose everything." "Then you lose everything," Luke said simply. "Better to lose land than to lose your daughter's soul. Better to start over with nothing than to build on a foundation of misery." "Easy for you to say," Thomas shot back, desperation making him bold. "You don't have a family to feed, a legacy to protect." "I had both," Luke's voice cut like a blade. "Lost them in the war. Lost my brothers at Antietam, my farm to carpetbaggers, my wife to fever while I was off playing soldier. So don't tell me I don't understand loss. Mr. McAllister, I understand it better than most." The congregation absorbed this information in stunned silence. Sarah studied Luke with new eyes, seeing the pain carved into the lines of his face, the weight he carried in those broad shoulders. "Then you know," Thomas said desperately. "You know why I have to do this, why she has to—" "I know why you think you have to," Luke corrected. "But I also know there's always another way. Question is, are you brave enough to take it?" "What way?" Sarah asked, hope warring with fear in her voice. "We owe $3,000 to Harper's Bank. Our cattle are dying. Our crops failed. What possible way?" "The railroad," Luke said simply. Elliot's face went white. "What about the railroad?" Luke smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Funny thing about the railroad coming through, they need beef for their workers. They need supplies. They need guides who know the territory." He looked at Thomas. "You know this land better than anyone. McAllister, your knowledge is worth more than you think." "The railroad contracts are already spoken for," Elliot said quickly. Too quickly. "Are they?" Luke's smile widened. "Because I had an interesting conversation with a surveyor in Cheyenne. Seems the railroad's none too pleased with the quality of beef they've been getting. Seems some suppliers have been cutting corners, delivering diseased cattle, cheating on weights." The color drained from Elliot's face entirely. Several ranchers in the congregation exchanged meaningful looks. "You can't prove anything," Elliot hissed. "Don't need to," Luke replied easily. "Just need to make sure the railroad knows there are honest alternatives available. Men like Thomas McAllister, who'd rather lose everything than cheat on a deal." "Is this true?" Judge Hawthorne stood up from his pew. As the territory's circuit judge, his word carried weight. "Harper, have you been shorting the railroad?"
That's not... This is ridiculous,"
Elliot spluttered. "We're here for a wedding, not a business discussion." "No," Sarah said, her voice stronger than it had been all morning. "We're here for a sale. Let's call it what it is. You are buying me to get my father's land because you know the railroad will need to cross it for the new route." Gasps echoed through the chapel. This was news to most of the congregation. "The surveyor told me about that too," Luke added conversationally. "The original route's no good, too steep through Morrison's Pass. They need an easier grade, and that means going through McAllister land that'll be worth 10 times what it is now." "You're lying," Elliot snarled, but everyone could see the truth written on his face. "Sarah." Thomas McAllister stumbled forward, his face a mask of anguish. "Is this true? Did I almost sell you to this man for land he was planning to steal anyway?" "Not steal," Elliot protested. "Buy legally. For the price of the debt, it's business." The slap echoed through the chapel like a gunshot. Sarah stood there, her hand stinging, staring at the red mark blooming on Elliot's cheek with a mixture of shock and satisfaction.
That's for pretending this was about helping my family, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. And this, she started to raise her hand again, but Luke caught her wrist gently. He ain't worth bruising your hand over, he said softly. Men like him always get what's coming to them in the end. This isn't over, Elliot threatened, rubbing his cheek. You still owe me $3,000. That debt doesn't disappear just because… Actually, Judge Hawthorne interrupted. It might. If what Mr. Callahan says about the railroad contracts is true, if you've been defrauding the railroad company, then any debts owed to your bank could be subject to review. Fruit of the poisonous tree, as they say in legal circles. You can't be serious. Dead serious, the judge replied. I'll be telegraphing the railroad commissioners this afternoon. I suggest you prepare your documentation, Mr. Harper, all of it. The implications hung heavy in the air. Elliot looked around the chapel, seeking support, but found only cold faces and averted eyes. His empire, built on exploitation and sharp dealing, was suddenly on very shaky ground. Sarah, Reverend Morrison said gently, I need to know, of your own free will. Without coercion or pressure, do you wish to continue with this ceremony? Sarah looked at her father's stricken face, at Luke's steady presence, at the letter still clutched in her hand. Then she straightened her spine and spoke the words that would change everything. No, she said clearly. I do not. The Reverend nodded. Then, by the authority vested in me, I declare this ceremony null and void. What God has not joined together, let no man force asunder. You'll regret this, Elliot snarled, backing toward the door. All of you, when you're starving, when your children are begging for bread, remember this moment. Remember who you chose to trust, a drifter and a dead man over solid business sense. I'll remember, Sarah said quietly. I'll remember the day I chose hope over fear, the day I chose possibility over certainty, the day I honored the memory of a good man instead of betraying it. Elliot stormed out, his expensive boots thundering on the wooden floor. The door slammed behind him with a finality that seemed to release something in the air. Sarah swayed on her feet, the emotional toll of the morning catching up with her. Luke steadied her with a gentle hand on her elbow. You did good, he said quietly. James would be proud. She looked up at him, this stranger who'd appeared like something out of legend to save her from a fate worse than death. What happens now? Luke glanced around at the congregation, some supportive, some worried, all uncertain. Then he looked back at Sarah and smiled, that transformative expression that made him seem younger, lighter. Now, he said, now we figure out how to save your farm honestly. Now we talk to the railroad about fair contracts. Now you start learning how to smile again. He paused, then added softly, if you'll let me help, that is… Sarah clutched James's letter, drawing strength from those last precious words. Find someone who makes you smile again. She didn't know if Luke Callahan was that someone. She didn't know if she'd ever be ready for another someone. But for the first time in 6 months, she wanted to find out. I'd like that, she whispered. I'd like that very much. And there, in a dusty chapel in Cedar Ridge, with the morning sun streaming through cracked windows and the future uncertain but suddenly full of possibility, Sarah McAllister took her first step toward keeping her promise to a dead man, the promise to live, truly live, once more. The congregation began to disperse in small clusters, voices rising in animated discussion. Some shot sympathetic glances at Sarah, while others hurried away, clearly wanting no part in whatever storm was coming. Through it all, Thomas McAllister stood frozen in place, staring at his daughter as if seeing her for the first time. Papa, Sarah began, moving toward him, but he held up a trembling hand. What have I done? He whispered, his voice broken. My own daughter. I nearly sold my own daughter. You were desperate, Sarah said softly. We all were. That's no excuse. Thomas sank onto a pew, his head in his hands. Your mother would have horsewhipped me for even considering it. Lord knows I deserve worse. Luke stepped forward, his spurs ringing softly on the floor. Mr. McAllister, beating yourself up won't change what almost happened. What matters is what happens next. And what can happen? Thomas looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. Harper owns the bank. He holds our note. Even if the judge investigates his railroad dealings, that won't happen overnight. He can still foreclose. Actually, Judge Hawthorne interjected, pausing on his way out, I have the authority to issue a temporary stay on any foreclosure proceedings pending investigation. Consider it done. Hope flickered in Thomas's eyes. You do that. I should have done it sooner, the judge admitted. We've all been turning a blind eye to Harper's practices for too long. Took a stranger's courage to make us see our own cowardice. After the judge left, Luke helped Sarah down from the raised platform where she'd stood. She moved mechanically, still processing the morning's events. We should get you home, Luke suggested gently. You need rest, and we need to plan. I can't go home like this, Sarah said, gesturing at the wedding dress. I can't wear this another minute. Mrs. Sullivan, who'd been hovering nearby, stepped forward. I've got a spare dress in my wagon. Dear, nothing fancy, but it's clean and it'll fit well enough. 20 minutes later, Sarah emerged from the small room behind the chapel wearing a simple calico dress. She'd washed her face and repinned her hair, looking more like herself than she had in months. The wedding dress lay crumpled in a corner, abandoned like the life it had represented. Outside, Luke was talking quietly with Thomas and several other ranchers. Tommy McAllister, Sarah's 12-year-old brother, had appeared from somewhere and stood listening with wide eyes. Sarah! Tommy ran to her, throwing his arms around her waist. Is it true you don't have to marry that awful man? It's true, she assured him, hugging him tight. We'll find another way. Mr. Callahan says he knows people who can help, Tommy said excitedly. He says the railroad needs honest suppliers, and Papa knows where the best grazing lands are, and... Slow down, son, Thomas said, though he managed a weak smile. We're a long way from saved yet. But we're a long way from lost, too, Luke pointed out. Harper showed his hand today. He got greedy, and greedy men make mistakes. You seem to know a lot about his business, old Pete Morrison observed shrewdly. Luke shrugged. I make it my business to know about men like Harper. Been tracking his kind since the war ended. Carpetbaggers, profiteers, men who prey on the desperate. His face hardened. Lost too much to their kind to let them operate unopposed. So this isn't random, Sarah said slowly. You coming here today? Not entirely, Luke admitted. I was in Cheyenne when I heard about the wedding. Heard about a young woman being forced to marry to save her family's land. Reminded me too much of... He trailed off, pain flickering across his features. Well, it reminded me of things I couldn't prevent before. Figured maybe this time I could make a difference. But James's letter? Sarah protested. You said you rode with him. I did. Every word I said was true. Luke pulled out a small leather pouch and handed it to her. Inside were military papers, a photograph, and other personal effects. These were his. He asked me to bring them to you along with the letter. The timing of the wedding just made it more urgent. Sarah fingered through the items, her throat tight. James's cavalry insignia, a photograph of the two of them at last year's harvest dance, a small gold ring, not expensive, but precious beyond measure. He was saving up, Luke said quietly, planning to propose proper when he got back. Talked about it constantly around the campfire, drove the other fellows half mad with his mooning. Fresh tears threatened, but these held sweetness along with sorrow. That sounds like James. We should go, Thomas said firmly. Standing around here won't solve our problems, and Harper won't take this morning's humiliation lightly. They made their way to the wagons,
Sarah riding with her father and Tommy while Luke followed on his horse, a magnificent black stallion that looked like it could run forever. As they left Cedar Ridge behind, Sarah kept glancing back, half expecting to see Harper's men following. "He'll need time to regroup," Luke said, reading her worry. "Men like Harper are dangerous, but they're also cautious. He won't move until he knows exactly where he stands legally." "And where do we stand?" Thomas asked. "Really stand. I mean, not just hope and wishful thinking." Luke considered. "Better than you did this morning, but not as good as you'll need to be. The railroad investigation will help, but Harper's got deep pockets and deeper connections. We need to be smart." They were passing through a narrow valley when Tommy suddenly pointed ahead. "Riders coming." 3 men on horseback blocked the road. Sarah recognized them as Harper's men: Brock Henley, Jed Carver, and Miguel Santos, hard men who did Harper's dirty work. "Well now," Henley drawled, resting his hand casually on his gun. "Mister, Harper sends his compliments and a message." "We don't want trouble," Thomas said, though his voice shook. "Neither does Mr. Harper," Henley continued. "He's a reasonable man, willing to forget this morning's unpleasantness if Miss McAllister reconsiders. The offer stands: marriage in exchange for the debt. Otherwise," he shrugged eloquently. "Otherwise what?" Luke had moved his horse forward, positioning himself between the Harper men and the wagon. "Otherwise, things might get difficult for the McAllisters." Carver spoke up, his scarred face twisted in what might have been a smile. "Accidents happen on these frontier farms. Cattle get sick, barns catch fire, people get hurt." "Is that a threat?" Luke's voice had gone dangerously quiet. "Just observing how dangerous ranching can be," Henley said innocently. "Mister, Harper would hate to see anything happen to such a nice family, especially with a boy young as Tommy around." Sarah felt her blood turn to ice. Beside her, Tommy pressed closer, trying to look brave but failing. "You threatening children now?" "Henley," Luke asked conversationally, "that what you've been reduced to?" "No threat," Henley insisted. "Just facts. Mister, Harper protects his friends. Can't say the same for his enemies." "I see." Luke shifted slightly in his saddle. The movement seemed casual, but Sarah noticed how it gave him a clear draw on his gun. "Well, since we're sharing facts, here's a few more. The surveyor I mentioned, he's not the only one I've been talking to. The territorial marshal in Cheyenne's real interested in some missing cattle from the Rocking R Ranch. Seems they ended up in a certain railroad beef shipment with altered brands." Santos, who'd been silent until now, went pale under his dark skin. "You can't prove nothing?" "Can't I?" Luke smiled. "Funny thing about running irons, they leave distinctive marks. And funnier thing about cowboys who drink too much, they talk, especially to friendly strangers buying rounds." The 3 men exchanged uneasy glances. Whatever Luke knew, it was clearly more than they'd expected. "Mister, Harper won't forget this," Henley warned. "Neither will I," Luke replied. "Tell Harper his threats against the McAllisters have been noted. Tell him if anything at all, happens to this family. I'll take it personal, and I've got friends too. Henley, friends who remember the war, friends who don't take kindly to women and children being threatened." "This ain't over," Carver growled. "No," Luke agreed. "But it's over for today. Move aside." For a moment, the standoff continued. Then Henley wheeled his horse around. "Remember what we said, Miss McAllister, the offer won't stand forever." They rode off in a cloud of dust, leaving the small party shaken but unharmed. "They'll be back," Thomas said grimly. "Yes," Luke agreed. "But not today. And by tomorrow, we'll be better prepared." "How?" Sarah asked. "We can't fight Harper's men. We don't have the guns or the numbers." "You don't fight men like Harper with guns," Luke said. "You fight them with truth, with a law, with exposure of their crimes." He looked at each of them in turn. But that means you need to decide right now. Are you willing to see this through? Because once we start down this path, there's no turning back. Sarah thought of the morning's humiliation, of James's letter, of the threats against Tommy. She thought of all the families like hers that Harper had crushed, all the dreams he'd stolen. "I'm in," she said firmly. "Me too," Tommy piped up, trying to sound older than his 12 years. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he straightened his shoulders. "I've been a coward," he said. "Let my desperation turn me into something I'm not. No more. Whatever comes, we face it as a family." Luke nodded approvingly. "Then let's get you home. We've got work to do." As they continued toward the McAllister ranch, Sarah found herself studying Luke Callahan, this mysterious man who'd appeared at just the right moment, who knew just what to say, who seemed to have his own reasons for opposing Harper. "Why?" she asked suddenly. "Why risk yourself for strangers?" Luke was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "Because I couldn't save my own family. Because I've seen what happens when good people don't stand up to evil men. Because James Walker died believing in something better than Harper's world, and that belief deserves to be honored." He looked at her then, and Sarah saw depths of pain and purpose in those whiskey brown eyes. "And because everyone deserves a chance to smile again, Miss McAllister, especially when the world seems determined to steal that smile away." The ranch came into view as the sun reached its zenith, the familiar buildings looking somehow different now. Not just a burden to be saved at any cost, but a home worth fighting for. Sarah McAllister had started the morning as a sacrifice. She was ending it as a soldier in a different kind of war, one fought with truth and courage rather than guns and violence. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in months, she believed it might be won. The McAllister ranch looked peaceful in the afternoon sun, but Luke's trained eye caught signs of trouble, fresh horse tracks around the barn, a window curtain twitching closed too quickly. The dogs that should have run out to greet them were nowhere to be seen. "Stop the wagon," he said quietly. Thomas pulled up short. "What's wrong?" "Maybe nothing." Luke dismounted, his hand resting on his colt. "Maybe something. Wait here." But Sarah was already climbing down. "This is my home. I'm coming with you." Luke started to protest, then saw the determination in her eyes. "Stay behind me then, and if I say run, you run." They approached the house cautiously. The front door stood slightly ajar, never a good sign in a country where dust storms could fill a house in minutes. Luke pushed it open with his boot, stepping quickly to the side. Well, Harper's voice drifted from inside. "Do come in. We've been waiting." Luke motioned for Sarah to stay back, but she pushed past him. In the parlor, Elliot Harper sat in her father's chair like he already owned the place. Two of his men flanked him, hands hovering near their guns. "Breaking and entering now." "Harper." Luke kept his voice calm. "Judge Hawthorne will be interested to hear about this." "I own the note on this property," Harper replied smoothly. "Simply inspecting my investment." He smiled coldly at Sarah. "You've had time to reconsider. I trust you've come to your senses." "Get out of my house," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Your house," Harper laughed. "My dear girl, nothing here is yours. Not the house, not the land, not even the clothes on your back. Everything belongs to the man who holds your father's debt." "Which might not be you for much longer," Luke pointed out. "Especially after the judge investigates your railroad dealings." Harper's expression darkened. "You've caused me considerable inconvenience. Mr. Callahan, I don't like inconvenience." "Then you're in the wrong business." Luke replied, "Stealing from desperate people tends to be inconvenient when someone finally stands up to you." The tension in the room ratcheted higher. Sarah could hear her father and Tommy approaching outside, their footsteps on the porch. "I came here to make one final offer," Harper said, standing. "Generous, considering this morning's embarrassment. Marry me, Sarah.
and I'll forgive the debt completely. Refuse, and I'll take everything. The land, the house, the livestock. I'll see your father in debtor's prison and your brother in the workhouse." "You can't," Sarah began. "I can—" Harper's mask of civility slipped, revealing the cruel man beneath. "I own the judge in Cedar Ridge. I have connections in Cheyenne. Your friend here might have stirred up some trouble, but it won't last. Money always wins in the end." "That where you're wrong," Luke said. "Money's just paper and metal. What wins is what folks are willing to fight for." Harper laughed. "Fight with what you're one man. Callahan. I have dozens. You have a worn-out rancher and a girl who can't stop crying. I have the most powerful men in the territory in my pocket." "You have employees," Luke corrected. "Men who work for wages. I've got something better." "And what's that?" Luke smiled. "Friends." The sound of approaching horses made everyone turn. Through the window, Sarah saw riders coming, 5, 10, 15, more. She recognized some of them old Pete Morrison and his sons. Judge Hawthorne with several men she didn't know, Mrs. Sullivan's husband with his ranch hands. "What is this?" Harper moved to the window, his face paling. "This," Judge Hawthorne said, entering without knocking, "is a citizens committee, formed this afternoon to investigate certain irregularities in banking and business practices in Cedar Ridge." Behind him came a man in a federal marshal's badge. "Elliot Harper, I'm Marshal Coleman. I'll need you to come with me." "On what charges?" Harper demanded. "Fraud, to start with," the marshal replied. "Seems the railroad company's been looking for someone to blame for those short-weight cattle shipments. Your man Santos was very helpful once we explained his options." Harper turned on his men, but they were already backing away. When the walls started crumbling, hired loyalty evaporated fast. "You can't do this," Harper snarled. "I own this town." "You used to own it," old Pete Morrison spoke up. "But towns got a way of changing ownership when folks get fed up enough." "This is all perfectly legal," Judge Hawthorne added. "Marshal Coleman has warrants. I've issued stays on all foreclosures pending investigation. And these good people are here as witnesses to ensure everything's done proper." Harper looked around wildly, seeing his empire crumble in real time. His gaze landed on Sarah, and for a moment, naked hatred flashed in his eyes. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You think you've won, I'll be back. "You'll be in federal custody," Marshal Coleman interrupted. "And if you threaten this young lady again, you'll be there even longer." As the marshal led Harper out, Sarah felt her knees go weak. Luke caught her elbow, steadying her. "It's done," he said softly. "You're safe." "How?" She looked around at all the people who'd come to help. "This morning they were all afraid of him." "This morning they didn't have hope." Luke replied, "You gave them that. When you stood up to Harper, you showed them it was possible." Thomas McAllister pushed through the crowd, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. "No more apologies. Papa." Sarah hugged him tight. "We're family. We stand together." "About that debt," Judge Hawthorne interrupted. "Given the circumstances and Harper's arrest, I'm prepared to negotiate a settlement. The territorial government's been looking for reliable beef suppliers for the Indian agencies, honest men who won't cheat on weight or quality." "We could do that," Thomas said eagerly. "We've got good stock, and I know every water source between here and the reservation." "Then we'll discuss terms tomorrow," the judge said. "For now, I think these folks deserve some peace." The crowd began dispersing, people stopping to shake Thomas's hand or pat Sarah's shoulder. The siege was over. The threat ended, at least for now. As the sun set, Sarah found herself on the porch with Luke. Her father and Tommy were inside, planning enthusiastically for a future that suddenly seemed possible again. "You'll be leaving, I suppose," she said, not looking at him. Luke was quiet for a moment. "Was thinking I might stick around a bit.
Make sure Harper's really finished. Help your PA get that government contract set up proper. And then, he turned to face her. That depends. On what? On whether a certain young lady's ready to keep the promise she made to a dead soldier. Sarah's breath caught. What promise? To learn how to smile again. Luke's own smile was gentle. I'm not James. Sarah, I'm not trying to be, but I think he'd approve of us being friends. Maybe, in time, something more. Sarah thought about the morning's terror, the afternoon's victory, the uncertain future ahead. Then she thought about James's letter. Find someone who makes you smile again. I'd like that, she said softly. Friends. For now. For now, Luke agreed. They stood together as darkness fell over the Wyoming plains. Two wounded souls who'd found each other in the midst of crisis, in the house behind them. Tommy's laughter rang out, the sound of childhood reclaimed, through the window. Thomas's voice carried as he wrote letters to potential business partners. You know Harper wasn't wrong about one thing, Sarah said suddenly. What's that? This isn't over. Men like him don't give up easy. No, Luke agreed. But neither do people like us. He looked at her, his expression serious. The road ahead won't be easy. Sarah, Harper has friends, influence, even from prison. He could cause trouble. I know. Sarah squared her shoulders. But I'm not the same woman who stood crying in that chapel this morning. That woman was alone, afraid, beaten down. This woman has family, friends, hope. And a guardian angel who's handy with a gun, Luke added with a slight smile. That too. Sarah felt an answering smile tug at her lips. The first real smile in months. Though I'm getting the feeling you're more avenging angel than guardian. Maybe a bit of both. Luke's expression grew distant. I've got my own ghosts. Sarah, my own debts to pay. Harper's just one of many men who've gotten rich on others' misery. So this is what you do, ride from town to town, saving desperate women from unwanted marriages. Something like that. He looked at her. Though this is the first time I've been in time, the weight of unspoken stories hung between them. Sarah sensed depths to Luke Callahan that would take time to explore. Pain that matched her own. Losses that had shaped him into the man who'd crashed through those chapel doors like divine intervention. Will you tell me, she asked, someday about who you couldn't save? Luke was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, someday, when we know each other better, when the words don't choke me. I can wait, Sarah said. Even if it takes a while, I'm not good at talking about feelings and such. James wasn't either, at first. The name didn't hurt as much as it had this morning. But he learned. Good men always do. You think I'm a good man? Sarah looked at him, this complicated stranger who'd saved her from a fate worse than death. I think you try to be. That's what matters. A comfortable silence fell between them. Inside. Thomas called for Sarah to come help with supper. Normal life resuming. Simple routines that had seemed lost forever just hours ago. I should go, she said, but didn't move. Probably. Luke agreed, also not moving. They stood there a moment longer. Two people on the edge of something that might be friendship, might be more, might be exactly what they both needed to heal. Finally, Sarah turned to go. At the door, she paused. Luke, thank you. For everything. Don't thank me yet, he said. We've got a long road ahead. I know. She smiled, really smiled, for the second time. But for the first time in months, I'm looking forward to traveling it. She went inside, leaving Luke alone on the porch. He stood there as the stars emerged, thinking about promises made and promises kept, about second chances and the courage to take them. Somewhere out there, Harper was being transported to federal custody. Somewhere, other men like Harper were preying on the desperate. Somewhere, other women like Sarah were crying through wedding vows they didn't mean. But here, now, in this small corner of Wyoming, one woman had found her voice, one family had found their hope, and one drifter had found a reason to stop drifting, at least for a while. It wasn't a happy ending. Those were for fairy tales, not frontier realities, but it was a beginning. And sometimes, Luke thought as he headed to the barn to tend his horse, a beginning was all anyone could ask for. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Harper's trial, the government contracts, the slow work of rebuilding trust between Sarah and her father, the slower work of learning to smile again. But tonight, the McAllister Ranch stood free, its windows glowing with lamplight and laughter. Tonight, that was enough. The pursuit came 3 days later, just as Luke had predicted. Sarah was drawing water from the well when she spotted the dust cloud on the horizon. Her heart hammered as she ran to the house, the bucket forgotten.
"Riders coming," she shouted. "Maybe a dozen."
Luke appeared from the barn, his expression grim. "Harper's men, get your father and Tommy. We're leaving." "But the ranch will be here when we get back. You won't be if we stay." He was already saddling horses with practiced efficiency. "I know a place. We'll be safe there." Thomas emerged with Tommy and a hastily packed bag. "I won't run from my own land." "You will if you want to keep your family alive." Luke cut him off. "Harper's out on bail. Word is he's hired guns from Laramie. Professional killers, not local thugs." The dust cloud grew larger. Sarah could make out individual riders now, spreading out to encircle the ranch. "Papa, please," she begged. "Luke knows what he's doing." Thomas's resistance crumbled at the fear in her voice. "All right, Tommy, get the ammunition from the house. Sarah, food and blankets. Move." They worked with desperate efficiency, loading supplies onto the horses. Luke kept watch, his rifle ready. The riders were close enough now that Sarah could see sunlight glinting off their weapons. "Time to go," Luke said. "Follow me and ride hard. Don't look back, no matter what." They thundered away from the ranch, heading into the rugged country to the north, behind them. Shouts echoed as Harper's men realized their prey was escaping. The chase was on. Luke led them through terrain that would have terrified Sarah a week ago. Narrow canyon trails, steep ridges, dense pine forests. But fear was a powerful teacher, and she found herself riding with a skill born of necessity. "Where are we going?" Thomas shouted over the sound of hooves. "Friend of mine has a place in the mountains." Luke called back. "Josiah Blackwood. We rode together in the war. He'll help." They rode for hours, pushing the horses hard but not too hard. Luke knew exactly when to slow down, when to speed up, when to cross water to break their trail. Gradually, the sounds of pursuit faded. As the sun began to set, they climbed a narrow trail that switched back and forth up a mountainside. Sarah's legs ached, and she could see Tommy swaying in his saddle from exhaustion. Just when she thought they couldn't go any further, Luke raised his hand. "We're here." At first, Sarah saw nothing but trees and rocks. Then Luke gave a low whistle, 2 short and 1 long. The forest seemed to shift, and a man emerged from cover, a rifle trained on them. He was tall and lean, with skin the color of burnished copper and eyes that missed nothing, despite the weapon. His face broke into a grin when he recognized Luke. "Well, I'll be damned. Luke Callahan, as I live and breathe." "Josiah." Luke dismounted, clasping the man's hand warmly. "Good to see you, old friend." Trouble following. Josiah's eyes scanned the trail behind them. "About a dozen hired guns. We lost them a few miles back, but they'll pick up the trail come morning." Josiah nodded. "Better get inside then. Mary's got stew on." He led them through what looked like solid forest until Sarah realized the trees had been carefully arranged to hide a trail. They emerged in a small clearing where a log cabin sat, smoke rising from its chimney. It was built into the mountainside, defensible and hidden. A woman appeared in the doorway. Indian, Sarah realized, with long black hair and a face that was both beautiful and fierce. She held a baby on her hip and a pistol in her free hand.
Company, Josiah.
Her voice was wary.
Friends, Mary, Luke's here.
The wariness transformed into welcome.
Luke, it's been too long.
She looked at the exhausted group.
Come inside. You look like you've been riding hard.
The cabin was larger than it appeared from outside, stretching back into the mountain. It was simply furnished but comfortable, with thick walls and strategic windows that could serve as gun ports if needed.
Sit,
Mary commanded, already ladling stew into bowls. Eat first, talk after. Sarah had never tasted anything so good. The hot food revived her, and she found herself able to think clearly again. Tommy had fallen asleep against their father's shoulder, his bowl empty. So, Josiah said, settling back with his pipe. What brings Luke Callahan to my mountain, last I heard? You were hunting railroad thieves in Kansas. Different thieves, same story. Luke explained the situation quickly and efficiently. Josiah's face darkened as he listened. Harper, he said finally.
I know the name. He tried to buy my valley last year, didn't take kindly when I said no.
How'd you keep him off? Thomas asked. Josiah smiled, but it wasn't pleasant. Let's just say his men learned these mountains can be dangerous for those who don't know them. After losing 3 surveyors to accidents, he decided to look elsewhere. You can't just make people disappear, Thomas said, shocked.
Didn't make anyone disappear,
Josiah replied calmly. Mountain lions got one. Another fell off a cliff in the fog. Third one decided California might be healthier and left on his own. He winked at Luke. Amazing how clumsy city folk can be in rough country.
Papa,
Sarah said softly.
These are the kind of friends we need right now.
Thomas looked uncomfortable but nodded. The rules were different out here, where law was what you could enforce and justice was what you could take.
You can stay as long as needed,
Mary said firmly.
The baby could use some company besides us old folks.
She smiled at Sarah.
And I could use another woman to talk to. Gets lonely up here sometimes.
We're grateful, Sarah said, meaning it. But I don't want to bring danger to your family.
Danger,
Josiah laughed.
Ma'am, Luke and I survived Antietam together. Spent 3 days in a field hospital that got shelled twice. Takes more than hired guns to scare us. Besides,
Mary added,
we've got advantages here. This mountain is our territory.
Anyone comes up that trail, we'll know about it long before they reach us.
How?
Tommy asked, having woken up enough to be curious.
Trade secret,
Josiah said with a mysterious smile.
Let's just say the mountain has eyes.
They talked late into the night, planning and preparing. Josiah had connections, other veterans, Indians who trusted him, mountain men who valued their independence. Word would go out. Harper's men would find these mountains less than welcoming. Sarah found herself sitting outside with Luke as the others prepared for bed. The stars were brilliant at this altitude, unmarred by dust or smoke. Your friend seems unusual, she said carefully. Luke smiled. Josiah's one of the few truly free men I know. Fought for the Union, married for love instead of convention, lives how he chooses, makes his own rules.
Is that what you want, to be free like that? I thought it was...
Luke was quiet for a moment. After I lost everything, I figured freedom meant not caring about anything enough to be hurt again. Just drift, fight the bad ones, move on. And now, he looked at her, and Sarah's breath caught at what she saw in his eyes. Now I'm thinking there might be different kinds of freedom, the kind where you choose what to care about instead of running from it. Before she could respond, a sound drifted up from the valley below, the lonely howl of a wolf. It was answered by another, then another, until the mountains rang with wild music. They're hunting, Luke said. Pack working together, stronger that way.
Is that what we are now, a pack?
Maybe. He stood, offering her his hand. It's late. You should rest. Tomorrow we start fighting back. Inside, Mary had made up beds with thick blankets that smelled of pine. Sarah lay listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the mountain wind in the trees, distant animal calls, the creak of settling wood. "Sarah," Tommy whispered from his blanket roll, "are we safe here?" She thought about lying, giving him the comfort of false certainty, but he'd grown up fast these past days. He deserved truth. "Safer than we were," she said, "and we're with good people. That counts for a lot." "I like it here," he said sleepily. "Feels like an adventure from one of my books." Sarah smiled in the darkness. Leave it to Tommy to find excitement where she found fear, but maybe that wasn't wrong. Maybe choosing to see adventure instead of disaster was its own kind of courage. She thought of James, wondered what he would think of all this. Would he approve of her running, of hiding in the mountains with a woman who defied convention and men who made their own law? Yes, she decided. James had been unconventional himself, full of dreams that didn't fit the narrow boundaries of town life. He would understand that sometimes survival meant breaking rules, that sometimes the only way forward was through wild country. "I'll bring your smile back," Luke had promised at the chapel, echoing James's last wish. Sarah touched her face, surprised to find she was already smiling. Not the bright, carefree smile of her youth, but something newer, harder won. The smile of a woman who'd faced her worst fear and found strength she didn't know she had. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Harper's men would come. There would be danger, possibly violence. But tonight, she was safe in a mountain cabin with people who asked nothing from her but honesty, who offered protection without price. "Thank you, James," she whispered into the darkness, "for sending him, for giving me the courage to choose." The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows, but the cabin stood firm, built to withstand worse storms than this, like the people inside it, Sarah thought, built to endure. She closed her eyes, letting sleep claim her. In her dreams, she rode through endless mountains under starlit skies, free as the wolves that sang in the darkness, wild as the land that sheltered her. The smile remained on her face until morning. The siege came at dawn on the fourth day. Sarah woke to Josiah's sharp whistle, 3 short bursts that meant danger. She grabbed the rifle Luke had been teaching her to use and took her position at the window. In the gray morning light, she counted 15 men spreading out below the cabin. Harper himself sat on his horse at the rear, letting his hired guns take the risks. "Steady," Luke murmured beside her. "They'll try to talk first. Men like Harper always want to pretend they're civilized." Sure enough, Brock Henley rode forward, stopping just out of effective rifle range. "McAllister's mister. Harper wants to talk. Come out peaceful-like, and nobody needs to get hurt." "We've got nothing to say to Harper," Thomas called back, his voice stronger than it had been in months. "Now that's not neighborly," Henley replied. "Mister, Harper's gone to considerable trouble to find you. Least you can do is hear him out. The only thing we want to hear from Harper is that he's dropping all claims to our land," Sarah shouted, surprised by her own boldness. Harper himself rode forward then, his city clothes looking absurd in the mountain wilderness. "Miss McAllister, you've caused me considerable inconvenience, but I'm a reasonable man. Return with me now. Honor our agreement, and I'll forget this unfortunate episode." "There is no agreement," Sarah replied. "There never was, just threats and coercion." "The law says otherwise," Harper's voice hardened. "You're harboring fugitives up there. The McAllisters owe legal debts. That makes them criminals in the eyes of the law." "Your law," Josiah spoke up for the first time. "Not the law of these mountains." Harper's attention shifted. "Ah, the famous Josiah Blackwood. I should have known you'd be involved. Still playing Indian. I see, still pretending that mixed-blood wife of yours makes you special." The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mary appeared at another window, her rifle steady. You want to repeat that? Harper want to insult my heritage to my face. Indians and fugitives, Harper sneered.
What a collection. Judge Morrison will have a field day with this.
Judge Morrison is probably signing your arrest warrants right now, Luke said calmly. Amazing what federal marshals find when they really start looking into a man's books. Harper's face flushed.
You think you've won. You think hiding up here changes anything I own judges from here to Denver.
I'll have you all hanged for kidnapping, theft, and sedition. Kidnapping? Sarah laughed, the sound carrying clearly in the morning air. I'm here of my own free will. Harper, first time I've been able to say that in months. We have witnesses who'll say otherwise, Harper threatened. Witnesses who saw Callahan force you from the chapel. Bought witnesses, Thomas said with disgust.
Like everything else you have.
The talking was over. Sarah saw it in the way Harper's men shifted, hands moving to weapons. Harper himself backed away, not wanting to be in the line of fire when violence erupted. Get ready, Luke warned quietly.
They'll rush us, try to overwhelm.
Henley's voice cut him off. Last chance, folks, come out, or we're coming in. Come ahead, Josiah called cheerfully. Hope you said your prayers. The attack came from 3 directions at once. Men rushed the cabin, firing as they came. The defenders responded with deadly accuracy. Luke and Josiah picked targets with the calm precision of experienced soldiers. Mary's rifle cracked steadily. Even Thomas managed to wound one attacker who got too close to Tommy's window. Sarah fired when she had clear shots, trying not to think too hard about what she was doing. These men had come to drag her back to slavery. They'd chosen their side. The first rush broke against the cabin's defenses like water against stone. 3 attackers lay still. Others crawled back to cover, wounded. But Harper had hired professionals. They regrouped quickly. They'll try fire next, Josiah predicted. Always do when the direct approach fails. Sure enough, smoke began rising from the woodshed. Sarah's heart sank. Fire was every frontier dweller's nightmare.
Don't worry,
Mary said calmly. We've planned for this. As if on cue, the sound of horses echoed from the ridge above. Sarah gasped as riders appeared, 12, 20, more. Indians, mountain men, and others she didn't recognize. They descended like an avalanche. My wife's family, Josiah explained with a grin. Did I mention she's the chief's daughter? The tide turned in moments. Harper's hired guns, caught between the cabin and the newcomers, threw down their weapons. Only Henley tried to fight on, and Luke's bullet in his shoulder ended that quickly. Harper himself sat frozen on his horse, watching his careful plans crumble. When Luke and Josiah emerged from the cabin, he tried to run, but a lasso from one of Mary's cousins brought him tumbling to the ground. They dragged him before the cabin, where Sarah waited with her family. Harper looked smaller now, his fine clothes torn and dirty, his arrogance replaced by fear.
Please,
he stammered. I'm a businessman. We can make a deal. No more deals, Sarah said firmly.
No more using money to hurt people. It's over.
You can't do this, Harper tried to rally. I have rights. The law... The law's coming, Luke interrupted, pointing to more riders approaching. Marshal Coleman led them, his badge glinting in the morning sun. Turns out the judge in Cheyenne was very interested in those altered cattle brands, and the missing tax revenues, and the forged documents. Not to mention the attempted murder charges you just added, Marshal Coleman said, surveying the battlefield. Harper, you're under arrest. Again. This time, I doubt any judge will grant bail. As they led Harper away, he turned for one last look at Sarah. You've ruined everything, he snarled. A lifetime of work.
A lifetime of theft, she corrected. A lifetime of crushing people who couldn't fight back. Well, we fought back, and we won.
The cleanup took hours. The wounded were tended, the fire extinguished, statements given to the marshal. Through it all, Sarah felt as if she were floating. It was over, really over. As the sun reached its zenith, she found herself standing with Luke at the edge of the clearing. Below, the authorities were loading Harper and his surviving men into a prison wagon. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you go home," Luke said. "Rebuild. Live the life James wanted for you." Something in his tone made her turn. "You're leaving?" It wasn't a question. She could see it in his eyes, the restlessness, the call of the road. "There are other Harpers out there," he said quietly. "Other families being crushed. I can't just—" "Yes, you can." Sarah grabbed his arm. "You can choose to stay, to build something instead of just tearing down the bad." "Sarah." "No." Her voice was fierce now. "You saved us. Let us save you. Stay. Help us make the ranch what it should be. Help us build the life James dreamed about." Luke looked at her, conflict clear in his eyes. "I don't know how to stay in one place. Don't know how to be normal." "Neither do I. Not anymore." Sarah smiled through sudden tears. "Maybe we can learn together." Behind them, Thomas cleared his throat. "If I might interrupt, Luke, I owe you more than I can ever repay, but I'd like to try. The ranch needs a foreman, someone who knows cattle, knows men, knows how to handle trouble. Job's yours if you want it." "And you'd always have a home," Tommy added eagerly. "Your own room and everything. We could go hunting, and you could teach me to track like you do, and—" "Slow down, son," Thomas said, but he was smiling. "Man needs time to think." Luke looked at each of them. Thomas, offering trust despite everything. Tommy, bright-eyed with hero worship, and Sarah, beautiful and brave and growing stronger every day. "What would James want?" he asked finally. Sarah's smile was radiant. "He'd want us to be happy, all of us, together." The prison wagon rolled away, taking Harper and the last of Sarah's fears with it. Around them, their new friends prepared to depart, but with promises to visit, to help with the ranch, to be there if needed. "It won't be easy," Luke warned. I don't know how to be what you might need." "I don't need you to be anything but yourself," Sarah said. "The man who crashed through those chapel doors. The man who stood between me and Harper. The man who keeps promises to dying friends." Luke was quiet for a long moment. Then, "All right, I'll stay. For now. See how it goes." "For now." Sarah agreed, knowing it was more commitment than he'd given anything in years. As they walked back to the cabin, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in so long she'd almost forgotten its name. Peace. Not the peace of surrender, but the peace of victory. The peace of choosing her own path. Mary was making a celebration dinner, ordering everyone around with cheerful efficiency. Josiah was regaling Tommy with war stories. Thomas was talking with the marshal about the government contracts, his whole bearing different now that hope had returned. "You did this," Sarah told Luke. "You gave us our lives back." "No," he corrected. "You did it. You found the courage to say no. I just provided backup." She slipped her hand into his, feeling him tense, then slowly relax. "Thank you for being the answer to James's prayer." "Don't know about that," Luke said gruffly. "But I know he'd be proud of you. The way you fought. The way you chose freedom over safety." "He'd be proud of us," Sarah corrected. "Of what we're building." The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Somewhere out there, other Harpers were scheming, other families were struggling. But here, now, in this moment, good had triumphed. Sarah McAllister had begun the week as a victim. She was ending it as a victor. And beside her stood a man who'd promised to bring back her smile, a promise well on its way to being kept. The future stretched before them, uncertain but no longer frightening. Together, they would face whatever came. Together, they would build the life that had seemed impossible just days before. And in the growing dusk, Sarah's smile lit up the mountainside like a beacon of hope. 5 years had passed since that morning in the chapel, and the McAllister ranch bore little resemblance to the struggling homestead it had once been. Where barren fields had stretched, now green pastures supported healthy cattle. The old house had been expanded, painted white with blue trim that caught the morning light. A new barn stood proud against the Wyoming sky. Sarah stood on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. At 33, she'd grown into her beauty, the hardships of the past tempered by the peace of the present. Her wedding ring caught the light, a simple gold band that meant more than all of Harper's wealth ever could. "You're up early again." Luke's voice came from behind her. He wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder.
"Couldn't sleep," she admitted. "Today's the day."
Luke understood immediately.
5 years ago today,
She'd stood weeping in a chapel. 1 year ago today, she'd stood in that same chapel, speaking very different vows to a very different man. "Any regrets?" he asked, though his tone suggested he knew the answer. Sarah turned in his arms, studying the face she'd come to love so deeply. The years had added a few more lines around his eyes, a touch of silver at his temples. But he was still the man who'd crashed through those doors like an avenging angel. "Never," she said firmly.
"Not for a single moment."
The sound of galloping hooves interrupted them. Tommy, now 17 and tall as Luke, came racing up the drive. He'd been checking the north pasture, a responsibility he took seriously as the ranch's future owner. "Sarah, Luke," he called out, reining in his horse.
"Visitors coming. Looks like the Blackwoods wagon."
Sure enough, Josiah and Mary's wagon appeared, along with several riders. Their visits were always celebrations, bringing news from the mountains and genuine friendship that had nothing to do with obligation or debt.
"Aunt Sarah,"
a small voice piped up as a little girl scrambled down from the wagon before it fully stopped. 4-year-old Rebecca Blackwood raced toward the porch, her mixed heritage evident in her beautiful features and dark, dancing eyes. Sarah caught her up, swinging her high.
"Hello, little one. You've grown again."
"Mama says I'm like a weed," Rebecca announced proudly. "A flower," Mary corrected, climbing down more sedately with help from Josiah.
"I said you're growing like a wildflower."
The women embraced while the men shook hands. Behind them, more riders appeared. Old Pete Morrison and his sons. Judge Hawthorne, now a close friend. And, surprisingly, Marshal Coleman. "What's this, a town meeting?" Luke asked, though his smile showed he wasn't truly concerned. "Something like that," the marshal said, dismounting. "Got news from Cheyenne. Thought you'd all want to hear it together." They gathered in the large kitchen Sarah had insisted on when they'd expanded the house, over coffee and Sarah's famous cinnamon rolls. Marshal Coleman shared his news. "Harper died in prison last week," he said simply. "Pneumonia," the doc said, though I suspect it was more like a broken spirit. Man couldn't handle losing everything. A silence fell over the room. Sarah waited for some feeling of satisfaction, of closure, but felt only a distant pity. Harper had chosen his path, and it had led where such paths always led. "There's more," Coleman continued. "Before he died, he wrote out a full confession, names, dates, everyone he'd cheated or threatened. The territorial governors using it to clean house. Lot of corrupt officials finding themselves out of work." "Good riddance," Thomas said firmly. He'd aged well these past years. The success of the ranch and the healing of his relationship with Sarah erasing decades of worry lines. "There's one more thing." Judge Hawthorne spoke up. "The governor's appointing a new territorial judge for this district. He asked my opinion on candidates." "And," Luke prompted.
"I suggested someone with unimpeachable integrity, someone who's shown courage in the face of corruption, someone the people trust."
He smiled. "Congratulations, Marshal Coleman. If you want it, the position's yours." The room erupted in congratulations. Coleman looked stunned, but pleased. I'll need to think about it. Talk to the wife." Justice Coleman, old Pete said, trying out the title. Has a nice ring to it. The gathering turned into an impromptu celebration. As the afternoon wore on, more neighbors arrived, word spreading as it always did in the frontier, the house filled with laughter and music. Tommy showing off on his harmonica while Josiah told increasingly tall tales. Sarah found herself in the kitchen with Mary, preparing food for the growing crowd. Through the window, she could see Luke teaching Rebecca and some other children how to lasso a fence post. "He's good with children," Mary observed. "Natural father material." Sarah's hand went unconsciously to her stomach.
I hope so.
Mary's eyes widened. "Sarah, are you—" "2 months along," Sarah confirmed, unable to hide her joy. "I haven't told Luke yet, wanted to be sure, and then I wanted to wait for the right moment. And that moment would be—" Sarah smiled. "Tonight, after everyone goes home, when it's just us under the stars, like that first night on your mountain." Mary hugged her tightly. "He'll be over the moon. That man looks at you like you hung the stars themselves." "He saved me," Sarah said softly. "No," Mary corrected. "You saved each other. That's what the best marriages do." As evening approached, the gathering moved outside. Tables were set up in the yard, lanterns hung from posts, creating a magical atmosphere. Thomas stood to make a toast. "5 years ago, I almost lost everything," he began, his voice carrying clearly. "My land, my children, my soul. I made terrible mistakes. Let fear drive me to almost destroy what I loved most." He looked at Sarah, tears glistening. "But my daughter found courage I'd lost. She said no to injustice, even when it seemed to cost everything." He raised his glass to Luke, and a stranger became family. A drifter found home. A man keeping a promise to a dying friend found something worth living for. "To second chances," Judge Hawthorne added. "To courage," Marshall Coleman contributed. "To family, both born and chosen," Josiah said, pulling Mary close. "To James Walker," Sarah said quietly, and everyone echoed the name of the man whose death had ultimately led to so much life. As the party continued, Sarah slipped away to visit a small grave on the hill overlooking the ranch. She'd had James's body moved here, wanting him close, wanting him to see what his sacrifice had helped build. "We did it, James," she whispered to the simple headstone. "We built the life you dreamed of. Not exactly how we planned, but beautiful all the same." She felt Luke's presence before he spoke. "He'd be proud of you." "Of us," Sarah corrected, taking his hand. "Luke, I need to tell you something." He turned to her, concern flickering across his face. "What is it?" Sarah took a deep breath. "Remember what you promised that day in the chapel, to bring my smile back?" "Every word." "Well, you did more than that. You brought my life back, my hope, my future." She placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "Our future." Luke went absolutely still. "Sarah, are you saying—" "I'm saying that in about 7 months, this ranch is going to hear the sound of a baby crying. Our baby." The joy that transformed Luke's face was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of spun glass. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Sarah asked, though the answer was written clearly across his face. "Happy," Luke laughed, the sound rich with wonder. "Sarah, I went from having nothing to live for to having everything to live for. Happy doesn't begin to cover it." They stood together on the hill, watching the sun set over their land. Below, the celebration continued, their chosen family filling the air with joy. In the distance, the mountains stood eternal, guardians of all they'd built. "I love you," Luke said, the words still new enough to carry weight. "I love our life. I love what we've built. I love who we've become. We've come a long way from that chapel." Sarah agreed. "From tears to laughter,
from despair to hope, from loneliness to family. And it's just the beginning. Luke promised. For us, for our child, for all of it. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought them here, the pain of loss, the terror of that wedding day, the courage to choose a different path, the slow building of trust and love. You know what James told me once, she said softly. He said the best stories aren't the ones where nothing bad happens. They're the ones where people face the bad and choose good anyway. Smart man, Luke said. I would have liked to know him better. You honor him every day. Sarah replied, by being the man he knew I'd need, by keeping your promise. Which promise? I've made you several. Sarah smiled, the expression lighting up her whole face. All of them, but especially the first one. You brought my smile back, Luke Callahan, and gave me reasons to keep smiling for the rest of my days. As they walked back down to rejoin their guests, Sarah's hand in Luke's, their child growing beneath her heart. The circle was complete, from sorrow to joy, from captivity to freedom, from isolation to community. They'd traveled the full journey. The little chapel in Cedar Ridge still stood, weathered but enduring. But now it hosted real weddings, unions of choice and love rather than desperation and greed. Harper's reign of fear had ended, replaced by something stronger, neighbors who looked out for each other, laws that protected the vulnerable, and the understanding that true wealth wasn't measured in land or cattle, but in the connections between human hearts. Sarah McAllister Callahan had wept during her first wedding vows, tears of despair and entrapment. She'd cried during her second wedding too, but those were tears of joy, of promises freely given and gladly received. And somewhere, in whatever realm the departed inhabit, James Walker smiled, knowing his last wish had been granted beyond his wildest dreams. Sarah had found someone who brought back her smile, and so much more besides. The end. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Sarah and Luke's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while telling it. Where are you listening from today? Please leave a comment below and let me know. I love connecting with listeners from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more authentic frontier tales, and share your thoughts about this story. Did you see that chapel door opening coming? What was your favorite moment until our next adventure on the frontier? Keep riding toward your dreams, partners.